Love doesn't announce its ending. It just stops showing up. For 3 months, Marcus slept on the couch. The leather sectional in the living room became his bed. The throw blanket draped across the armrest became his comfort. He said it was his back. Herniated disc, L4, L5, the kind of injury that arrives without drama and stays without mercy. The mattress was too soft, he explained. The couch gave him support. She believed him because believing required less than doubting, and because the explanation arrived with medical terminology that sounded rehearsed enough to be true. Their house had always been quiet, but that autumn it developed a new kind of silence, the kind that settles into corners and stays there, patient as dust. She would wake at 2 a.m. to use the bathroom and see the blue glow of the television bleeding into the hallway. He was always there, she thought, right there on the couch where he said he'd be, wrapped in the gray blanket her mother had given them for their 5th anniversary. This isn't fiction. This is how love disappears, one small truth at a time. Before the couch, there had been a rhythm to their evenings. Marcus would come home around 6:30, dropping his keys into the ceramic bowl by the door, the one they'd bought in Portland on their honeymoon, hand-painted with a blue heron that had faded over the years. She would be finishing dinner, something simple, chicken and rice, pasta with vegetables, the kind of meals that required attention but not thought. They would eat at the kitchen table, trading details about their days in the shorthand of people who had known each other for 11 years. He worked in IT for a medical supply company. She managed accounts for a law firm downtown. Their conversations were functional, pleasant, unremarkable. He would ask about her mother's hip surgery recovery. She would ask if the server migration was still causing problems. After dinner, he would load the dishwasher while she wiped down the counters, and they would move to the living room for an hour of television before bed. It was ordinary in the way that safety is ordinary. Not exciting, but reliable, dependable as sunrise. The back pain started in early September, right after Labor Day weekend. He came home one evening moving stiffly, one hand pressed against his lower spine. She asked if he was all right. He said he'd lifted something wrong at work, probably just a muscle thing, nothing serious. But the next night, he winced getting up from the dinner table. The night after that, he mentioned maybe sleeping on the couch. Just for a night or two, he said, until it settles down. She offered to buy a foam topper for the mattress. He said he'd already tried one at a friend's house, and it didn't help. She suggested a doctor's appointment. He said he'd made one for the following week. Everything he said made sense in isolation. It was only later, when she replayed these conversations in her mind, that she would notice how smooth they were, how each answer arrived before the question had fully formed. I didn't know then that this would be the last month we would sleep in the same room. The couch became his territory. He moved a phone charger to the end table. A glass of water appeared there each night, set on a coaster to protect the wood. The throw blanket stayed permanently arranged across the cushions, folded and refolded with military precision each morning before he left for work. She would pass through the living room and see the evidence of his presence, the slight depression in the leather where his body had been, the faint smell of his deodorant lingering in the air. She told herself it was temporary. Back injuries took time to heal. Her uncle had dealt with sciatica for 6 months before it finally resolved. These things happened. People got older, bodies broke down in small ways. It was normal, it was fine, but somewhere around mid-October, she started noticing other things. He began showering in the morning instead of at night. When she asked why, he said it helped loosen up his back before work. His phone, which used to sit on the kitchen counter during dinner, now stayed in his pocket, face down on the table beside his plate, or disappeared entirely into his jacket. He said the constant notifications from work were stressing him out, so he'd turned on Do Not Disturb mode. His work hours stretched longer. 8 o'clock arrivals became 8:30, then 9. He blamed the server migration project, said they were understaffed, said his manager was putting pressure on everyone to stay late. On Thursdays, he started going to physical therapy, or so he said. She never saw a bill from the therapist. When she asked how it was going, he would say, better, or slowly improving, and change the subject before she could ask for details. Everything he said made sense. Everything had an explanation, and yet she found herself lying in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, feeling something shift beneath her like tectonic plates grinding together miles underground. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday evening in late October. She had come home early from work, a rare occurrence made possible by a client canceling their afternoon meeting. The house was empty and still, exactly as she'd left it that morning. She made herself tea and sat at the kitchen table sorting through mail, bills, catalogs. a postcard from their neighbor who was visiting her daughter in Arizona. That's when she saw the receipt. It was crumpled at the bottom of Marcus's work bag, which he'd left on the chair by the door. She wasn't looking for anything. She was just moving the bag to make room for the grocery bags she'd brought in. But the receipt fell out when she lifted the bag, fluttering to the floor like a white leaf. Valentino's Italian restaurant. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, 1 tiramisu shared. October 18th, 8:47 p.m., Thursday, physical therapy, night. She stood there holding the receipt, reading and rereading the items. Her heart was doing something strange in her chest. Not racing, but stuttering, like it had forgotten the rhythm it was supposed to follow. She tried to build an explanation. Maybe he'd grabbed dinner after therapy. Maybe a coworker had joined him. Maybe the physical therapy place was near the restaurant. Maybe. She put the receipt back in his bag, exactly where she'd found it. That night at dinner, she asked how physical therapy had gone the previous Thursday. He said it was fine. They were working on core strengthening exercises. She asked if he was feeling better. He said yes, definitely, it was helping. She watched his face as he said this. The small smile, the easy eye contact, the way he speared a piece of chicken with his fork and brought it to his mouth without hesitation. She wanted to pull out the receipt. She wanted to ask why he'd lied. But something stopped her. Not faith exactly. More like the fear of what would happen when she spoke the question aloud. As long as she stayed silent, the moment remained suspended. Schrodinger's marriage, both intact and shattered until she opened the box. After that night, she started looking. Not aggressively, not with a plan, but she became a student of small details, the kind of observer she'd never been before. She noticed that his cologne, the woody sandalwood one she'd given him for his birthday, seemed stronger on Thursday evenings. She noticed that the mileage on his car was higher than his commute would explain, but not dramatically so. Just 40, 50 extra miles a week. Enough to visit somewhere, not enough to be certain where. She checked the laundry and found nothing unusual. She looked at his credit card statements online and saw charges at restaurants she didn't recognize, but they were always modest amounts. $30, $42, never enough to obviously include another person, but never little enough to be just coffee. His text messages remained invisible, locked behind a password he'd recently changed. He said it was for work security, new company policy. Everyone had to use alphanumeric passwords now, change them monthly. When she asked what the new password was, casually while folding laundry, he'd said he couldn't remember it himself, that his phone remembered it for him. She could have pushed harder. She could have demanded answers, confronted him with the receipt, refused to accept the convenient explanations. But she was afraid. Afraid of being wrong and destroying something good over paranoia. More afraid of being right and having to face what that meant. So she performed normalcy. She kissed him goodbye in the mornings. She asked about his day over dinner. She pretended not to notice when he tilted his phone away from her while typing. She pretended the couch was about his back and nothing more. Love and denial can look identical from the outside. November arrived with rain that never quite stopped, just paused between storms. The trees in their neighborhood dropped their leaves in resignation, and the streets became slick with copper and gold. Marcus's back supposedly was improving. He mentioned it less, but he stayed on the couch. By then, she had noticed the pattern. Thursday nights, he came home late, smelling of cologne and sometimes something floral, perfume that wasn't hers, or maybe just the scent of a restaurant, flowers on tables, ambiance purchased to make moments feel special. Friday mornings, he was distant, quieter than usual, as if something was weighing on him. By Saturday, he would seem lighter, more present, almost himself again. She started waking up in the middle of the night, not to use the bathroom, but to check. To walk down the hallway and look into the living room and see the blue television glow, see the shape of him beneath the blanket, see proof that he was where he said he'd be. It became a ritual, this 3 a.m. surveillance, though she never thought of it that way. She told herself she was just thirsty, just needed to stretch her legs, just couldn't sleep. One night in mid-November, she stood in the hallway watching him sleep. The television was playing some late-night program with the sound low, faces flickering across the screen in the dark. Marcus was on his side, one arm tucked under the pillow, breathing steadily. He looked peaceful, innocent. She wanted to believe the story he was telling. She wanted it so badly that for a moment, standing there in her nightgown at 3 a.m, she almost convinced herself that everything was fine. Then his phone buzzed on the coffee table. Once, twice, 3 times in quick succession. He didn't wake up, but she saw the screen light up, saw the preview of a message appear. Not the content, just the notification. Someone named A. Someone whose messages came in the middle of the night, when spouses were supposed to be asleep and worlds were supposed to be separate. She went back to bed. She did not sleep. The confrontation didn't come in a moment of rage or a planned intervention. It arrived quietly, on an ordinary Wednesday evening in late November, when she finally asked the question that had been building in her chest like water behind a dam. They were in the kitchen. He was loading the dishwasher. She was wiping down the counter. Everything was normal, routine, safe. And then she heard herself say it. "Who is A?" His hands stopped moving. A plate hung suspended between the sink and the dishwasher rack. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, dense with everything that had been unspoken between them for months. "What?" he said finally. "A, the person who texts you at 3 in the morning." He put the plate down carefully, precisely, into the rack, closed the dishwasher door, straightened up. His back, she noticed, looked fine. "A coworker," he said. "Do you take all your coworkers to dinner?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Valentino's, October 18th, Thursday night, when you were supposedly at physical therapy. The air between them changed texture, became something heavy and hard to breathe. He looked at her fully then, and she saw it, the moment when he decided what to tell her. Not the truth or a lie, but which version of the story to offer. "We're just friends," he said. "Friends don't text at 3 a.m. She's going through a difficult time, divorce. She needed someone to talk to." "So you're helping her?" "Yes." On the couch. He blinked. "What?" "Your back is fine. You've been sleeping on the couch for 3 months, but your back is fine. I can see it. The way you move. You're not in pain anymore. Maybe you never were." He didn't deny it. That was worse than a lie. The silence where a denial should have been. "Are you sleeping with her?" she asked. "No." "Are you in love with her?" The pause before his answer told her everything, not the words he said. "No, of course not." But the space before them, the half-second where he chose his response, that space was the truth. She set down the dishcloth. Her hands were shaking. "I need you to leave," she said. "Leave?" "The room, the house, I don't care. I just need you to not be here right now." He nodded, walked out of the kitchen. She heard him gathering his keys, his wallet, his jacket, heard the front door open and close, heard his car start in the driveway, heard the engine fade as he drove away into the November dark. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and stared at nothing for a very long time. What comes after is harder to describe than the breaking. The breaking has shape, a beginning, middle, end. The aftermath is formless, spreading out in all directions like water finding its level. He came back that night, late, after she'd already gone to bed. She heard him let himself in quietly, heard him move through the house collecting things, heard the spare bedroom door close. Not the couch this time, a different room, farther away. In the morning they were polite, carefully, devastatingly polite. He made coffee. She thanked him. He asked if she wanted the newspaper. She said no. They moved around each other like dancers who had forgotten the choreography, but still remembered not to collide. Over the next few days, in small conversations held in doorways and across rooms, the fuller picture emerged. Her name was Angela. They'd met at work 6 months ago when she transferred from the Boston office. Coffee turned into lunch, turned into longer lunches, turned into dinners. He swore they hadn't slept together. She almost believed him. Not because she trusted him, but because the intimacy he'd given Angela was somehow worse than sex. It was time, attention, the soft parts of himself he'd stopped sharing at home. He said he didn't know how it had happened, said he'd been lonely but didn't know why, said he loved her, his wife, her, the woman he'd promised 11 years ago to choose every day, but something had felt missing, and he'd tried to fill it the wrong way. She asked if he wanted to work on the marriage. He said yes. She wasn't sure if she believed him. She wasn't sure if it mattered. December came. They tried. Not dramatically. No couples therapy, no grand gestures. They just tried to be in the same room without the air between them turning to glass. He moved back into their bedroom, though she couldn't sleep with him there. Her body wouldn't allow it. Every sound he made, The shift of sheets, the change in his breathing, jolted her awake. After a week, she moved herself to the spare room. Better that than exhaustion that sank into her bones. The holidays arrived like an obligation. They went through the motions, put up the tree, bought presents for nephews and nieces, attended his office party where she met Angela for the first time, a small woman with nervous eyes who said hello, and then found an excuse to move to the other side of the room. She and Marcus posed for a photo together, his arm around her waist, both smiling the way people smile when they're trying to convince cameras of things that might not be true. On Christmas morning, they exchanged gifts at the kitchen table. He gave her a cashmere scarf, gray-blue, like winter sky. She gave him a book he'd mentioned wanting months ago, before the couch, before the receipt, before the name A entered her vocabulary. They thanked each other. They did not embrace. January brought a strange kind of clarity. She woke up one morning and realized she had a choice to make, not whether to stay or go, but whether to carry this weight or set it down. Forgiveness wasn't the right word for what she was considering. Forgiveness implied absolution, a return to innocence. That wasn't possible. He had shown her who he was in crisis, someone who ran toward comfort instead of standing still in discomfort, someone who chose ease over honesty. She had shown him who she was too, someone who looked away from truth until truth became unavoidable. Neither of them was innocent, neither was villain. They were just two people who had let the dailiness of life erode their attention, until the space between them grew wide enough for someone else to enter. She thought about leaving, packed a bag mentally a dozen times, imagined apartments she might rent, lives she might rebuild. But something kept her from going. Not love, exactly, not anymore. More like the understanding that running wouldn't heal anything. The wound would come with her, packed alongside her clothes and books, settling into whatever new space she tried to make home, so she stayed. Not for him, for herself, to see if there was a way through this that didn't involve pretending it hadn't happened. They began to talk. Real conversations, not the careful politeness of those first weeks. They talked about loneliness, hers, the kind that can exist even in a shared bed. They talked about how their marriage had become routine, how routine had become invisible, how invisible had become unbearable. They talked about what they'd stopped noticing about each other, the small, daily abandonments that had paved the way for larger betrayals. He told her about Angela. Not the romantic details. She didn't want those. But the feeling of being seen again, of having someone find him interesting, of remembering who he'd been before he'd become just a husband, just a provider, just someone who existed in service of routine. She understood. She hated that she understood. She told him about the nights she'd stood in the hallway watching him sleep, about the receipt she'd found and hidden, about the weeks she'd spent gathering evidence and saying nothing because speaking would make it real. He listened. Sometimes he cried. She didn't comfort him. Slowly, incrementally, in ways too small to measure day by day, things shifted. Not back to how they were, that was impossible, but forward into something new, something built on scar tissue instead of innocence. By March, they had established new rhythms. Friday nights, they took walks together through the neighborhood. No phones, just feet on sidewalk and breath in cold air. Sunday mornings, they made breakfast together, passing spatulas and coffee mugs in a kitchen that had learned to hold them both again. They were careful with each other, gentle. They didn't take anything for granted anymore, which made everything heavier, but also more precious. He'd stopped speaking to Angela entirely, changed jobs in February, took a position at a different company to remove the daily proximity. She never asked him if he missed it, the attention, the aliveness he'd felt. She assumed he did. Missing something didn't mean choosing it. In April, on a Saturday afternoon, when spring light was finally returning to the world, she found herself thinking about the couch, the leather sectional where this had all started, or where she'd first noticed it starting. Marcus was in the garage organizing tools. She sat on the couch, ran her hand over the armrest where his head had rested for 3 months, felt the slight permanent depression his body had left in the cushion. She didn't cry. She'd done enough crying. Instead, she sat there and remembered, not with longing, but with recognition. The couch was just a couch. The back pain had been just an excuse. The marriage was just a marriage, fragile and human and capable of both breaking and mending, though never in the same shape as before. Some nights, she still wakes at 3 a.m. Not to check anymore. He's there beside her, present in the dark, his breathing steady and real. but the habit of waking has stayed with her, carved into her circadian rhythm like a scar. She lies there in the stillness, listening to the house settle around them, and thinks about trust, how it's built in tiny increments over years and destroyed in moments, how rebuilding it is slower, harder, never complete. She thinks about Angela sometimes, wonders if she found what she was looking for or if she's still searching. Wonders if Marcus thinks about her too, in the spaces between waking and sleep where the mind can't lie. Probably he does. She's made peace with that. People carry their past with them. Pretending otherwise doesn't make it true. Their marriage now is different, more honest maybe, more fragile, certainly. They both know it could break again. But they also know that staying isn't the same as settling. It's an active choice, made new each morning. Some days that choice feels easy, some days it feels impossible. They make it anyway. It's been a year now since the couch, since the receipt, since the name A became a ghost in their house. Marcus still sleeps beside her, though she sometimes wakes and feels surprised by his presence, as if part of her expects to find him gone. The spare bedroom has become his office. The sectional is just furniture again. The gray blanket went to Goodwill months ago. Last week, she found herself thinking about that November evening when everything collapsed in the kitchen. She'd asked him to leave, and he had. And when he came back, everything was different. Not better or worse in any simple way, just different. Known instead of assumed, scarred instead of smooth. She doesn't regret staying. She doesn't regret the anger, the grief, the endless conversations held at midnight when they were both too tired to lie. She doesn't regret asking the question that broke everything open, because things that are broken can be examined, can be understood, can be rebuilt if both people pick up the pieces, whether they'll last another year, another decade, another lifetime. She doesn't know. No one knows that about any marriage. All you can know is right now, this moment, this choice. And right now, in this moment, with spring light coming through the bedroom window and coffee brewing in the kitchen and Marcus humming off key in the shower, she chooses to stay. Not because it's easy, not because the wound has fully healed, but because some kinds of peace are worth the work of earning them. The door is still unlocked. She could still leave. But she's not waiting anymore. Not for him to become someone else, not for the past to change, not for certainty that will never come. She's just here, present, building a life from what remains. That's enough. Some days, it's more than enough. It's everything.